Hello friends, so today's video is going to be a January reading wrap up. I would love your feedback and your suggestions though about how I'm going to structure this wrap up, and if there are certain things that I see you mention that I really like, I'll try to incorporate that in future wrap ups. If you don't care about any of this and you just want to jump to when I'm talking about books, then I'll have a timestamp that you can skip ahead to. But the way I want to treat my wrap ups for this year, or at least maybe try it for the first quarter, first half of the year, when I do a monthly wrap up, I want to treat it a little bit like a directory. And there's a lot of reasons that go into this decision, this idea. One is I would like to give you a heads up about all the books I've read and then direct you to the videos where I have gone more in depth with those, whether those be dedicated reviews that I've done, or if there's discussions, spoiler discussions, or new releases wrap-ups, because new releases wrap-ups, the way I've been doing them this year is for every 3 new releases I read, I do a new releases wrap-up. This allows me to go a little bit more in depth, and it's almost like doing mini reviews, and sometimes almost like doing an entire review because I can talk quite a while about books, but this way you have more insight than you would if I were to include all of these books only in a wrap-up. The other side of this with the books specifically is that in a wrap-up, I have been reading a lot and I find that I don't have a problem with doing a long video. I don't have a problem with talking about books for a really long time. That's probably pretty obvious. But what I don't want to do is waste your time. I don't want to do really repetitive videos where I've already talked about all of these books. I talked about it maybe a week ago, or I talked about that thing 2 weeks ago, and now I'm talking about it again. And now I'm being even more brief about what I'm saying in regards to that book. And so it would just be more helpful for you to go over to the new releases wrap up than listen to what I have to say in this video. So what I'm wanting to do is I'll let you know all of the books I read, and then I will have in the description bar the new releases wrap ups I have done already, that you can then go to those videos if you want more thoughts on those specific books. Then I will discuss whatever I haven't had the opportunity to chat about with you yet, meaning likely backlist fantasy books. That is what we're going to be talking about today, as well as in the future if I'm reading outside of fantasy, if I'm reading nonfiction or contemporary or something like that, I will be talking about those in wrap-ups for the end of months as well. The other aspect of the directory component to the wrap-up would be letting you know what videos have gone up on the other channels that I have. So I have a collaborative channel called Worldhoppers. I do want to try to find ways to work in talking about Worldhoppers, or at least mentioning it a little bit more often, because the AdSense revenue and the merch sales goes to charity. It's for a good cause, so I'd like to be able to have at least one time a month where I know, okay, I'm going to be mentioning Worldhoppers in this video and giving you some insight. So I'd like to let you know what videos have gone up on Worldhoppers for the given month, and then also what videos have gone up on the third channel that I have, Full Meta Analysis, which is where I talk about comics, manga, adaptations, video games, those sorts of things. So if you're interested in that side of my reading, you can go over there as well. I'm going to go about the rest of this video with this idea in mind, so you can kind of see it in action. And then, like I said, any feedback that you have, I would absolutely love and appreciate that. I'm going to start with the new releases wrap-ups, and specifically the ones that there are already videos up for these, which would be Legends and Lattes, Children of Ragnarok, Tress of the Emerald Sea, Stolen Heir, Song of Silver Flame Like Night, Encyclopaedia of Faeries, Spice Road, and Thorn Manor. The new releases I haven't discussed yet, but I will in a future new releases wrap-up, will be City of Nightmares and Unseelie. The 2 books that I DNF'd would be Empire of Exiles and Ruinous. And then some books that I had on my January TBR that I will carry over into these following months would be Piranesi and Godkiller. The manga that I picked up, we have Hat Atelier. I have read through everything that is out, which would be the first 10 volumes. We also have the first 2 arcs of Vagabond that I've read through, the first 9 volumes of Yona of the Dawn, the first 2 volumes of Silver Spoon, and then Downfall. These specific videos I have done on Full Meta Analysis, we have a Witcher Blood Origin non-spoiler review, as well as a separate spoiler discussion video. We also have Vagabond Arc 1 and Vagabond Arc 2 spoiler discussion, Witch Hat Volumes 1 through 5 discussion, Witch Hat Volumes 6 through 10 discussion, 23 manga to read in 2023, as well as 23 comics to read in 2023, anticipated video games, manga, manga and adaptations, a manga haul, and then a read, play, watch. Those were all the ones that went up in January. By the time this video goes up, there will be a lot more on there, including some Elden Ring content, some Arcane content, those sorts of things. On Worldhoppers, the 3 videos that went up in January were 2023 anticipated releases, best and worst fantasy of 2022, and then mood reading versus structured reading. I also have some videos on my Patreon that I've done, so if you'd like to see those, I'll have my Patreon linked. We have the first book in the Arrows Trilogy by Mercedes Lackey, a spoiler discussion. We also have a spoiler discussion for Song of Silver, Flame Like Night. We have a productivity sprint, and then also technically this took place on the last day of December, but we had a fun New Year's Eve hangout. That's the directory portion of the video. Now getting into discussing some of the books that I read. So we are going to be talking about the Arrows Trilogy by Mercedes Lackey, a little bit of Way of Kings, because I did start my reread for that, Age of Myth by Michael J. Sullivan, and also The Clockwork Boys and The Wonder Engine by T. Kingfisher. I'm going to start with the Arrows Trilogy by Mercedes Lackey, because this is one where I mentioned the first book a little bit, and I loved it. I've also mentioned that I was planning to continue on with Valdemar, and so now I get to talk a little bit more about books 2 and 3. This will be non-spoiler for the whole trilogy, so it's going to be kind of general thoughts, but overall, I really enjoyed book 1. I loved it. I thought the first book in this trilogy was exceptional. It was so ahead of its time. The emphasis on mental health and trauma and how a child develops through that, I thought was incredibly well done. There's also a lot of emphasis on just being kind to each other, showing your emotions. I was honestly shocked to see it, not just because of the fact that this was written in the 80s, but just in general. I don't really see even a lot of modern fantasy touching on those topics with as much nuance as Mercedes Lackey did. The main character, Talia, is someone who has grown up in an abusive environment and then has the opportunity to essentially go to like a magic school, a training school, to become what is known as a herald. Heralds are individuals that are chosen by these mythical horses. They are kind of like knights, but with more of a sense of loyalty to their queen. And these horses can sense something in these individuals that they know these individuals aren't going to betray the crown. They're not going to become corrupt. They're going to do everything in their power to protect their queen and protect their country. And Talia is picked by one of these horses. And then from there, this is where she's kind of whisked off to this particular training area. And it does have a sense of the magic school feel. I wouldn't say you're following her from class to class and that's everything about the book. The first book really is kind of a quiet, cozy, following this young girl as these adults are trying to recognize what has happened in her life and be kind to her and just help her develop into a lovely young woman. And it's so lovely to see. It was incredible. I absolutely loved it. The second book, we do kind of get Talia a little bit older. She is a teenager and she's kind of having different experiences at this stage in her life. And I didn't mind the exploration of where she was at that time. I think a lot of the book is kind of a character study. Even though we do head hop into a lot of other perspectives, I would still say this is mostly Talia's story. And that second book was fine. It was a little disappointing after how much I loved the first book, but I didn't dislike it necessarily. The third installment is where we really focus on Talia's training, where we really see it all come to light and see, okay, now that you have gone through the school, now that you've gone through essentially like an internship, now we're going to put you to the test and you're actually going to get tasks. And this is when things become extremely serious. The end of book 2 and then aspects of book 3 are very, very adult and they're very dark and they're very heavy. I didn't love the way certain things were handled. There was a couple of lines that I really didn't care for in the third book. I don't think though that they erased how impactful other aspects of this story are, and they didn't deter me from wanting to continue on with the series. I definitely want to explore more of Valdemar. The way I've discussed it with my friends in talking about it is it feels like the Valdemar world, because there's so many books within this world and there's different series. Sometimes there's standalones, sometimes there's trilogies that follow different characters and sometimes different times in the world. The way it feels to me is like each installment is a puzzle piece, and so you're really not going to get the extensive world building that you would get in a lot of modern fantasy, I was about to say modern family, sorry, modern fantasy, a lot of times you get really extensive world building in book one. You're laying the foundation, you're making sure the reader knows who's who and what's what, and then you kind of continue to build from there, whereas this feels like each series is just a piece. And the more you read, the more that the world is going to reveal itself to you. I actually kind of like that style of world building. I do think if you've read Robin Hobb, it feels a little bit like how she approaches world building. This was written before, and I do feel like there might be some inspirations from Mercedes Lackey in some of Robin Hobb's Realm of the Elderlings, but for me, the way that Mercedes Lackey writes her characters, the way she writes her world, just clicks a little bit more for my taste. What does really excite me, though, and going back to that puzzle piece analogy, is that the more of Valdemar I read, it feels like the more I'm going to actually see the big picture, which is really exciting. And also, and this is cheesy to keep going with this analogy, but I have a feeling there are going to be certain pieces, meaning certain installments, that I don't like as much. They're going to be like the part of the puzzle that you're like, ugh, it's just a bunch of brown over here. I want to get over where the pretty sunset is. There's the pinks and there's the yellows, and you want to get to those fun parts, but you got to do the other parts to get it completed. That's how I feel like it's going to feel going through this entire world, but I do want to go through the entire world, and I want to see, because I believe this was the first thing that Mercedes Lackey had published. I definitely am excited to see how her writing changes and develops the more that she puts in. After that was a book I wasn't planning on picking up, but my friend Monet, who I was buddy reading the Arrows Trilogy with, she was going to be picking this up, and I was like, okay, I'll give it a go. And then my friends Joshana and Jessie love this series, and with Monet reading it, I was like, okay, now is the perfect time to give it a try, and that would be Age of Myth by Michael J. Sullivan. I didn't love this, and I think a big part of it is the tone and the humor in it. I just don't know that I vibe with Michael J. Sullivan's humor. I read the very first Rhyrea, and when I say first, I don't mean first bind-up, I mean the first book. I found even then, I liked a lot of the world, and I thought that the writing was really fun, it was really accessible, but there was just something about the tone and the humor and the way the characters communicated with each other that it was almost too lighthearted and almost too campy without leaning into the extremes. My friend Leanna kind of picked this up, and I was talking to her about it, and both of us were kind of describing it the same way, where, well, she had a great analogy that I'm going to steal, so Leanna, sorry, I'm stealing this, but she mentioned that in the Marvel movies, it definitely feels like there are times where we can't just let a scene be silent, we can't let a scene be quiet, we can't let something lie, we kind of always have to break the tension with a silly little joke, and I don't love that. I get that it's realistic for sometimes people to lighten the mood by joking around, or for the narrative to have something kind of funny to take off some of the heaviness of a scene, but I also want to sit in certain scenes. I also want to sit in our feelings a little bit more. I don't always want the silly. Now, the thing that I said that Leanna, when we were chatting, was like, yes, exactly, was that I weirdly can do both really campy and then really depressing, but I'm very picky about the in-betweens. So, for example, I feel like Full Metal Alchemist, which I love, it leans really, really hard into the campy. It can be so ridiculous at times, and then it hits you with the biggest gut punches, but it commits to both of those things. And then there are certain stories that are just kind of a bummer. The Kingdom of Back is a good example. It was just kind of sad and somber and a little depressing to read about, and I loved that book. So that one definitely sits down here. And then there's the just always outrageous books that they don't take themselves too seriously. They're always about having a good time. But the in-between, I'm very picky about. And this one falls into that in-between. I think a good way to describe it is, I think that the tone feels young adult, but the world feels adult. I did really like the world. There was a couple characters that I also quite liked, but one of the reasons why I think I never really grew to extremely care about any of the characters is that they always felt like they came second to the plot. An example is there's a character who early on, someone that she loves, that she has loved for most of her adult life, something has happened to that person, and we really don't see her think about that, or we don't really see her grieving until someone else mentions the other person. Like, someone will want to potentially start a relationship with her, and she'll be like, oh, but this person I love, they only just died. And you're like, okay, I mean, you haven't really been thinking about it that much. And then someone else will mention something and say something horrible about the person that has passed away. And then she's thinking about the person who's passed away. And I'm like, I would like to sit with her in her grief. I would like to sit with her as she's trying to process what has happened. I'd like to see that a little bit more, because that takes something to the next level for me when characters reflect. And I didn't really feel like we got a ton of reflection. I think the very opening of the book is going to be a good indicator as to whether or not this might be for you, because we see a different character, something happens to someone that they know, they don't necessarily care about, they don't love this person, but they do have a relationship with this person, and something happens to them, and they're just kind of like, well, okay. And I'm like, what? It was so bizarre, the start, and I'm like, why are we not having more of a reaction to what just happened? And I felt almost exactly the same when I read the first book in Rhyria. I don't remember what the scene was, but I remember there was a moment where I'm pretty sure someone had died, and then another person just like walked over the corpse to just keep on going, and I was like, this was kind of a big deal. Why are we not treating it like it's a big deal? So I think it's just, there's this kind of disconnect for me. I thought about continuing on. It's not one that I've completely written off continuing on with, because my friends who love it say it's the future installments that really expand on the world, that have really big moments, the really emotional moments. So maybe someday, but at the moment, it's not something that I'm necessarily prioritizing. After that, we have The Clockwork Boys and Wonder Engine by T. Kingfisher. So I have read quite a bit of T. Kingfisher at this point. Ever since I read and loved Nettle and Bone, I've been devouring her works. Nettle and Bone and A Wizard's Guide to Defensive Baking are still my two favorites. And then I've never disliked something she's written, but I haven't loved anything the way I've really loved those two, and that is true of these as well. This is a duology, so you read these two books and you're done. And actually the synopsis on Goodreads, the very opening line, I think is a great way to get a little taste test of T. Kingfisher's humor, and also it describes the very initial characters very well. It says, a paladin, an assassin, a forger, and a scholar right out of town. It's not the start of a joke, but rather an espionage mission with deadly serious stakes. So that is the setup for those characters. They go on this mission, and this mission entails trying to discover more about these mechanical soldiers that are a threat to this particular country. And not only are they supposed to discover more about them, but they're kind of tasked with doing what they can to destroy these things as well, which seems pretty much impossible. So throughout the beginning of the book, we have a lot of the characters saying, this is a suicide mission, we're all gonna die. And you kind of get this heist feeling from it. You're pulling these misfits together, and you're putting them together, and they're trying not to kill each other along the way, and they don't get along, but then a couple of them maybe have attraction to each other, and they're all totally different personalities, and so you're seeing them trying to work together for this impossible task, but they really are a merry band of misfits. They do sit somewhere between being action, adventure, heist fantasy and being fantasy romance. They're not actually fantasy romance, but the romantic tension and subplot is strong enough that I think it's important to note, so that if you go into this, you have an idea of what you're going to be getting. And then it is action adventure. I would say that the romantic aspects of the story come into play a little bit more in book 2, The Wonder Engine, but in book 1, you get a lot of that will they, won't they, the tension building between certain characters. And I liked the couple. I liked the interactions between the characters. I thought it was fun. It is very random. I don't think it's the kind of fantasy story that really tells you all about the world. It just kind of feels like you're in a piece of something much bigger, and here's what it's looking like in this part. I do like her creativity. I also like that it never feels like she takes herself too seriously, so her books are always fun. And the whole impossible task thing I do really like. I like when the stakes feel impossible and you have no idea how they're ever gonna take down this force, this antagonist. I liked that. I just think that this one didn't quite hit the way that some of her other ones have for me. Last would be my reread of Way of Kings. I've only started this. I have not yet completed it because I'm taking my time with this. I really want to read it slow and start tabbing more things. One thing that has stood out to me a lot in this reread is just the way that very, very quickly the characters are being established, and the fact that you're getting foreshadowing for what's to come, and the way that it's so sneakily right in front of you immediately. And so I really like that. And I really like the way that when you reread one of Sanderson's works, as you read through it the first time, you get to know these characters so well, but you have hints as to why they are the way they are, why certain people they hate, or why certain things bother them so much. And then once you discover what those are, it's kind of like an aha moment, it's a reveal. But then something that's really a thing to appreciate on reread is, now that you know that information, everything, you're just like, oh, they feel so real. It makes so much sense why they are the way they are. And you're seeing all these little things that, okay, first time around, you're like, okay, well, there's something up with that guy, or there's something up with this. I don't really know what it is, but we'll see. And now you just can take it all in so much more, and you just feel so connected to these characters. As cheesy as it is to say, it kind of feels like these are my friends. Because when you really know your friends really well, you know all the little things that kind of make them tick. You know their frustrations. You know the things that they really love. So with this, it's like, to read them from the beginning, it feels like you already know them. And so when something will happen that wasn't a big deal before, because you didn't know these characters the first time, you're getting to know them. But now that you do know them, you just are like, oh, they're going to hate that they said that. Or, oh, I'm sure they got a laugh or a kick out of that, or whatever the case may be. So I'm really enjoying this reread. I can't say too much else right now, except that I love Way of Kings so much, and I love Kaladin. What's new? I still love Kaladin. I love Kaladin so much. That's it for my January wrap-up. Let me know your thoughts on how this was structured. I will try to look through your suggestions and fit those in. But anyway, thanks so much for watching. I'll have all relevant links in the description bar down below. I hope you have a lovely rest of your day, and I'll see you later. Bye.